Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we talk about cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and I love talking about and ringing cards, which we'll be doing on today's episode later on.
Well, we'll be talking about them through the whole entire episode.
Yes.
And then we will be ringing them at the end.
We'll be ringing them at the end of the episode. Thank you, David.
Do you think there's something we could do at the beginning to kind of to cancel out what we do at the end?
Yes, a good show generally has a beginning, middle, and end, just like a good story. And I think at the beginning of our episode, we'll do something a little bit different than what we've done on other episodes, and we'll thank our patrons.
We will. So, in a shocking display of mixing it up, we are going to thank our patrons at the beginning of the show. And as is the true place for all our patrons, right here at the beginning of the show, because you guys really make us what we are. It's through your contributions to the show that the show is able to be what it is. So if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, we have a Patreon account right here. You can see patreon.com/cardtalk2018 goes all the way over, and there you'll be able to choose at what level you wish to donate per month, and that is that's going to be awesome for us. But there are 21 loyal patrons right now, starting with Carl and moving to Daniel, David, Jake, James, Jason, Joseph, Joshua, Justin, Kyle, Lou, Matt, Mike, Dominic, Niall, and I'm still waiting on confirmation about Niall's name. I think it's Niall, but
we appreciate him regardless.
We especially appreciate him.
His name correct.
Right. I'm a big correct name guy. But then there's also Phil, Robert, Russ, Sean, Steve, and Vardane. So we've had a couple of new patrons. We're actually up over 20 patrons now. So it's not quite uncomfortable yet to read all 21 patrons' names, but it's starting to get there. So
we'll get there.
Eventually we'll get to the point where it will be super uncomfortable to read all the patrons' names, and that will be awesome. So, Ted, we are here to talk about a card. Unfortunately, Grant is not along for this ride. So, what card are we going to be talking about today?
Yes, today's card, David, is Ringmail. Ringmail is a 2-cost tactics attachment. It has the traits item and armor, and it reads, attached to a dwarf or hobbit character, restricted. Attached character gets +1 hit point and +1 defense.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
What do you think of that, David?
What do I think of that?
Yeah, what do you think of that if you were a player who played hobbits or dwarves?
It's good. I like this card. Ted, what do you think?
I like it too.
Okay, should we ring
thanks
it?
for joining in.
Now for the end of the show. No, let me. I'm glad you played into that. We don't rehearse these shows. I know that's shocking to you guys at home, but we don't rehearse this. I feel like the Ringmail. I feel like Ringmail has been a card that's been out for a long time. It came out in the Long Dark, so in the Dwarf Delph cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been around for a long time, and I feel like, while not a staple necessarily, I feel like it makes its way into a lot of my Hobbit decks because it gives the hit point and the defense. The designers of the game are real stingy about giving multiple defense points. They like to give extra hit points pretty regularly, but there's not very many cards that give multiple hit points. So for a card to give two, I don't want to say defense things to be confusing, but you know what I'm saying.
Well,
Like,
they are.
yeah,
They're the two stats that are for a character's survivability.
yeah. So two survivability stats. For 2 in tactics, I think is pretty par for the course, and there's not a lot of things that hobbits love to have on in terms of armor, because there's, the Citadel plate, but a lot of the armor, especially lately, has been trait restricted. Like ancestral armor has to go on nobles, and dwarven shield has to go on dwarves, and I guess the round shield is, but that doesn't give any sort of defense. That just
It gives conditional defense.
yeah. I mean, so to have this kind of consistent effect is pretty good in a hobbit deck. And of course, I think in a dwarf deck it's good, but I think that in a dwarf deck there's just a lot more options than the ringmail. So if you want somebody to have like, you have Spirit Dine, so he's your defender. So you can use ancestral armor on Spirit Dine and not ringmail, and that's kind of a better play. Although, I mean, I know that it's different in sphere, and it's, has things like that, but different cost. But I feel like, that this card is more cut out for hobbits than it is for dwarves. Even though, I have a co-host that's going to say, it's that, +1 hit point, +1 defense for 2, it's not so bad. It's okay. But, like, I just find myself putting this in a lot more hobbit decks than dwarf decks, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay. Sure.
So,
there's great hobbit targets, certainly.
Yeah.
Tom Cotton is like, I think this is like his number 1 card for Tom Cotton.
Yeah, that and Boots from Erebor is
also good for him. Yep.
But yeah, I agree. Like, this goes on him. Goes on Spirit Frodo pretty easily. Slides on him, and Sam, I think is pretty good. And lastly, before I throw it off to you to talk about your experiences with this, I think it's nice that this goes on a character. There's just a lot of attachments that are reserved for heroes. And so the fact that this goes on a character and is not unique, it is restricted, but it's not unique, definitely is nice. So Ted, what do you think about ringmail?
Yeah, it's getting a defense bonus is great. There's certainly, now that the card pool has grown since the card came out, there's a lot more ways to get them. But yeah, it's still kind of can be hard to come by. So an extra defense, I find it playing it more on my my dwarf characters or hobbit characters. Believe it or not, I think it's actually what's great for leadership Dane, because he ends up doing a lot of defending if you need someone to defend, and then you just give him that extra hit point in defense, since he's not like his spirit version. And you're right, the fact that it goes on a character is also pretty great. There's a few good dwarf allies that are good targets for this card. The immediate one that comes to mind is the Longbeard Sentry, because he's also a 3-cost tactics dwarf, and he is a base 2 defense. He can get Sentinel with his ability, and then another 1 defense. So he'll be up to 4 Sentinel defense with his ability in this card, which is good. And there's another spirit dwarf who is a Sentinel innately, and his name escapes my mind. It's Erebor something.
Oh, it's the one that's 4
Erebor
cost
Guard.
battle. Oh, right, the Erebor Guard, right? I play him in my mining deck because he costs 4, but you can reduce that cost by 2 if you discard 2 cards.
Yeah. So he's 2 defense, 3 hit points, and he's a Sentinel 2. And if you invest 2 more resources into him, then he's 3 defense and 4 hit points, and he's much more likely to survive and hang around with boosting his stats a little bit.
Right.
But it's getting a defense boost is wonderful. It's great. Bomber loves this card too. I played a lot on Bomber. And if you're running dwarves with it, a lot of times it can be, well, not a lot of times, but some of the times it can be played for free if you are playing well equipped.
Right.
Which lets you. Did you want to read it?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, well equipped will let you, for 0, discard 2 cards off the top of your deck, and you can pick an eligible attachment, and maybe even both. If they're eligible attachments, and put them on a dwarf character. So a lot of times, this will come off the top of my deck with well equipped, and then you just throw it onto a dwarf character for free.
Right, and the Ring of Thror is also very similar to that. I know you have a penchant for forgetting of the guarded attachments, but that Ring of Thror, you get the ready, and then as a cost to ready, you discard the top card of your deck. If it's an attachment, it comes into play for free.
Yeah, and this is also an armor card too, within tactics, so you can use it to play Sterner Than Steel, which is the 0 cost event that you exhaust an armor to cancel a shadow card. So if you're going to play this on, Bomber or Hero Dory loves this card too.
I was going to say Dory, but does Hero Dory love the card? Here's the question, and with all respect,
he
to,
does.
he does. No, but with all respect to Aaron Fishbaugh, who came on the show and discussed Hero Dory, I mean, if you're just going to throw Dory's defense to somebody else, I mean. Okay, Dory likes it based on the fact that he has 2 defense and 5 hit points, and he's a stout defender. Like, okay, but if you're going to throw Dory's defense to another ally or to another character, another hero, based on, I guess his card text says to another hero, then why not just play the ringmail on that hero that you're going to give the defense to?
Well, you'll have to listen to our Dory episode for the insight on that. But Dory is flexible. Right? So this is a great card for Dory because sometimes Dory, he's defending by himself with his Sentinel ability, or he's giving his defense to another hero. And this just adds to that value. So Dory is built to be flexible, and this is just a great card for him. It boosts his defense, period. And that's what Dory needs to do, is boost his defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a card like this, and Ted, I mean, this card speaks to a bigger part of the game.
A card like this. It
speaks to a bigger part of the game, and I think that you and I have talked about this, and Grant, of course, is on board as well with this. Is I think that maybe the most important yet not so flashy part of the game. And when I say like the most important thing, especially early game, is having a defender, right? Like, and I think we were talking about it when we did Unexpected Courage or one of those readying card shows where we were saying, like, if you're going to put Unexpected Courage anywhere in the first turn, you have to put it on a defender because that's what can kill you from the beginning. You can usually take a questing unsuccessfully a couple of times. You can usually take, not attacking a couple of times or, one round.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can't do is afford to take something undefended or something without and lose a hero with it. So defending is maybe the most important thing to get out.
I would argue, for those exact points. Defending is the most important thing in the game, and this is a defense card. That's a great point.
Where does it fall on defense cards in the game, though? Like, I feel like this is good, but is it awesome?
It's just, I mean, it's okay. It gives you, even that extra hit point gives you flexibility, because if you have to take an undefended attack, you now just have a little more, you have one extra wiggle point of room, where if that shadow card is +1 attack, or whatever the value may be, like it just gives you a little bit extra wiggle room to be safe and then maybe heal up the next turn.
Yeah.
So all this card does is add survivability, and it's affordable at 2 resources. Like I think it's worth the cost, as opposed to like a Citadel plate is very expensive,
right.
even though it can go on any hero.
Right. What about, and I think that's right. Like you can't have every card in your deck be a bombastic, like end the game sort of card. It can't all be Light the Beacons and Path of Need and
Right.
the free people. Like you just can't. That's not what the game is. You're never going to win anything if that happens. So in terms of utility cards for being out there, it doesn't have to be flashy to be useful in a lot of different situations, right?
What you're saying is this card is very practical.
Yeah, it's totally practical. And I feel like this card was made like because you just need a card that does this. It wasn't necessarily because it's super thematic, although it's thematic because it goes on to dwarves and hobbits, and so, like I think it was just kind of like the creation of the card was kind of wedged in there. There's not any sort of reference to ring mail in the or important reference to ring mail in the game. There's one, or in the book. There's one scene in the Lord of the Rings trilogy movie where Gimli puts on ring mail and is like ready to go to war, and it's like human size, it's man size, and he's a dwarf, and it goes down to the floor. But so I don't think that this is necessarily a super thematic card. I think it's just like, hey, we need a card that does this, and this is how it's going to get put in there, right?
Yeah, I think it's also like a nod to like Frodo's mithril shirt.
Oh, probably. Yeah.
Right. I think that's why they're like, oh yeah, like ring mail, like mithril shirt, even though that now is a card on its own. I think that's sort of where from a design point they kind of pictured it.
And that makes a lot of sense too, because those first couple of the first couple of cycles were designed by Nate French, and he was kind of mirroring some of the bigger events that were happening in the Legendarium. So the trolls being one, the conflict of the Carrick. We eventually saw the actual troll scenario, and We Must Away or Break a Day, but conflict of the Carrick was kind of that sort of nod to that scene in The Hobbit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's I do enjoy me a good ring mail. Like I said, especially playing it for free on dwarves. And then it just, but I count on it for if I'm playing a dwarf archetype deck, or I have a dwarf as my primary defender, such as Bomber or Dory. I'm like, this is the go-to card. This is like, well, what to boost their defense? Ring mail, and you get a hit point. The only card I think I'll compare it to is, for what it does, is Hobrock of Mail.
Yeah, the Hallberg, right? Yep.
Yeah. So
but again,
have you played that one very much?
That's trait restricted, right? Not that.
Yeah.
Again, I say that as if ring mail is not trait restricted, but I play dwarves and hobbits all the time, so it feels like it's not trait restricted.
Yeah. Why don't you read? Do you have Hobrock handy?
No, but I will right now. Here, pull it up and edit.
I'd say as far as cost to effect goes, it's the most direct comparable card.
Yeah, so the Hallberg of Mail is a 1-cost leadership attachment that says attached to a Dale or warrior character. So here you have a race and a trait, like a job and a race. And so then it's a limit 1 per character, and it's not restricted, so that's always good. And if you get +1 defense, and if it's Sentinel, then you get +1 hit point. So yeah, so it's similar, very similar to ring mail. And actually, a Hallberg of Mail is actually very similar to ring mail. Like, that's what they are in real life, IRL. That's what they're kind of the same thing. So.
Right. Yeah. So I think we'll have to do an episode on Hallberg, but the Hallberg also has part of its bonus is conditional, but it's also trait restrictive and it costs less. This is kind of more like forthright on its traits, but then costs 1 more. neither of the bonuses are conditional except for the trait restrictive part of it.
Right.
So it's got a lot of uses, and then you can mix up hobbits and dwarfs and where it's going to go. And you already mentioned a few great. There's probably not a lot of hobbit allies this will go on, but there's definitely a few heroes, namely Sam and Tom Cotton that we mentioned. I think are the top two, and you mentioned Frodo also.
Yeah, I think that Frodo makes a good target as well. But I find if you're playing Frodo, sometimes you don't have that. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like if you're playing Frodo, sometimes you're not playing with tactics. And I don't know why that is, but I just feel like that's something that happens.
What? I feel that way too, and I think it's because Frodo does the job of defending by his own,
right?
Without having he's like a spirit defender type character that you can pair with another sphere that isn't tactics to attack.
Yeah, he's kind of the least hobbit of the hobbits, right? Because he's an awesome defender, and he can go into non-hobbit decks because he's spirit, and you can do all sorts of other things with him. What about I was going to say, what about open the armory? We talked about ways to fetch this thing.
Oh yeah, that's a great open the armory.
Open the armory.
Yep, you can also play it with the spirit hero bard. Spirit bard, he can just pay for items and do a spear match. So if you're playing bard and then a Oin or something, or you have no tactics, you could put this or Frodo, right? You could be playing a mono spirit deck with bard and then still get this onto Frodo,
right?
Which is neat. And I think the last point I'll make of it is I'm thinking about contracts, and it's restricted. So in a 3 Hunters deck, this is a great card for hobbits and dwarves because they can pay it for 1, and then it counts towards flipping the 3 Hunters contract.
Right. And I guess my last thing that I will say about this is that when I was building my Bond of Friendship Hobbit deck, and because of the restrictions that you have in there, where you need 10 of each card, 10 of each sphere, and only 2, I found that it's nice to have that tactics attachment because it's just nice to be able to have something that boosts defense because you fill up all the other spheres with other things, and then all of a sudden you need to rely on tactics to get out your weapons and defense cards, and you're like, oh. And so it really fits nicely into that Bond of Friendship deck because you've used up all those slots for other things,
Yeah, same thing. I have a couple of Bond of Friendship dwarf decks, and this builds sort of the same thing.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, it's for their trait, and it gives a good defense boost. So, and it's only 2 cost. So you can play it within a turn of drawing it if you save your resource, which is okay.
Yep.
Which I like.
Yep. Well, I mean, does this mean we have reached the end of the episode?
I think we're gonna ring the ring mail.
Yes. And so, Ted,
how many rings is it? I'm going to count the rings on it. Okay.
While you're counting, I'll lead into the ring rating.
There's so many.
Right.
Oh man, it's beautiful artwork too.
It is beautiful artwork. It's I like the way that the light is shining off of the back of the dwarf there. Maybe Gimli. Maybe that's supposed to be Gimli. Maybe it's just
the flavor text on the card is Gimli, and it looks a lot like Gimli.
Right. So, just Ted, in case you forgot, or maybe you just never really paid attention, we have this highly arbitrary yet scientific system where we ring a card on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the one card to rule them all, or the best card in the game, and 10 is the worst card in the game, or a card that we throw back into the fiery chasm from whence it was made. So, Ted, I'll let you go first, buddy. What do you got?
Yeah, so this card is just a static boost to your defense, and we covered in the episode how important defending is, because you made a great point. Defending is the one thing you can't really afford not to do, because if you don't defend, the game will end. as opposed to not attacking, not questing. Like that's a really great point that you made. This card is great at helping you do that. It is trait restrictive, right? It's hobbits and dwarfs only, but it's a cheap way to help you do that. Like, it's, even if you lose it to a shadow card, like, I spent 2, which is not nothing, but it's, I could have spent more on it. So I'm going to give it a 3.
A 3. Ted, I just have to say that lately you've been gone on the other side of 5. I mean, I could probably name the episodes at the beginning of when you first came on the show that you were like 6, 8, 7, 5, 6, 9, 5, 6, 8. Like, you were right up there. Now lately it seems like you're doing a lot of 3s and 2s and 4s. Maybe.
Well, we've been doing a lot of good cards recently that earn those ratings. And this card is, if you're playing a hero with those traits to do the job of defending, which we named many, it just helps you do that, and it's so practical. It just helps you survive, and to invest in your defense is a good investment for your board state.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Mr. Tall
Mister?
Hobbit.
Isn't that a...
Yeah.
Or I could be a fat Sylvan. I could be good at... You don't see any fat elves in the...
You had a bit too much lembas.
Yes. One too many loaves. But I think I agree with everything that you were saying. Like, it's just, cards don't need to be flashy to be included in the deck. I said that earlier in the show, but I think it's just kind of this card that if you're playing dwarves and hobbits, you really look at and you put it in there because you just kind of need dwarves and hobbits that need those stat boosts. So
yep.
So it's kind of like the all the signals from the beginning of the game, give +1 attack, +1 defense. This one's a restricted version and it is trait restricted, but
yep.
So it's just kind of a normal attachment. So I think I'm going to give it a 5, just middle of the road sort of, and because it's trait restricted, I have to go kind of, I would give it a 4 if it were anything, 4 or 3, but if it could go anywhere, but because it's dwarf or hobbit, I think I have to go with a 5.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I feel like every time I sit down to make a deck, though, I'm like, okay, my first thought is, okay, half of my heroes are
How
dwarves.
can I get ring mail in this deck? So now I have my 3 copies of ring mail out, and now I have to build around this.
Yeah. No. I'm like, okay, half of the heroes in the game are just dwarves, so I'm going to set those aside.
All right.
And then here's what I have to work with if I'm just going to not play any dwarves in my deck. But there's so many great targets. Like I said, we didn't... Leadership Gimli, too, forgot to mention him. He's a built-in Sentinel defender, and he loves extra hit points. Now, he's got the Hobrock and Sphere
right,
that we mentioned, but this is just another great choice for him.
Right. Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, I always enjoy
down on that card.
Ted, I always enjoy these shows that I get to do with just you. It's we very rarely get to do them just you and me, and it's always a lot of fun. So
sometimes we have pairings, or you do shows with Grant too, just because of scheduling and things like that. But
right. Yep,
we got to do Ring Mail, and this was fun. So for people running Dwarves and Hobbits, give it a look, because it might just save your hero one day.
Yeah. And there you have it, everybody. That's Ring Mail, and join us again as we talk about more cards in the game. Have a good night.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube And there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.